What if everything you've been taught about achieving success, finding happiness, and securing your future is actually the very thing keeping you from it? What if the you struggling, striving, and suffering isn't the real you at all, but merely a pretender, a false claimant to the throne of your consciousness? Today we explore the most radical and liberating truth that spiritual teachers have whispered for centuries, but that our culture desperately tries to silence: the necessity of dying to self, the great deception. We live in a world that worships the personal self. Every advertisement, every self-help program, every achievement-oriented philosophy tells you to build yourself up, assert yourself, promote yourself, defend yourself. You are number one, they declare. Look out for yourself first. And so we spend our entire lives constructing this elaborate edifice called me, my success, my security, my reputation, my rights, my opinions, my future. But here is the truth that changes everything. This personal sense of self, this me that we protect and promote so fiercely, is the very source of all our suffering. Think about it. Every fear you experience comes from this separate self. Every anxiety about the future, every resentment about the past, every comparison that leaves you feeling inadequate. All of these arise from the belief that you are a separate, vulnerable entity that must fight for its survival and success in a hostile or indifferent world. The masters of mystical wisdom from ancient times to the present have pointed to a single transformative principle. The personal self must die so that the true self may live. What is this self that must die? Let us be clear about what we mean. We are not speaking of physical death, nor are we advocating the destruction of individual identity or the loss of personality. What must die is the false sense of separation, the illusion that you are merely a body-mind organism, isolated and alone, dependent entirely on your own efforts and resources. This false self has many faces. It is the voice in your head that constantly judges and compares. It is the worry that tells you that you are not enough, that you don't have enough, that you need to protect what little you have. It is the pride that needs to be right, to be recognized, to be validated by others. It is the fear that believes it can lose something precious, that disaster lurks around every corner, that you must control every circumstance to be safe. This self is built entirely on thought, on concepts, beliefs, memories, and projections. It has no reality except what we give it through constant mental activity. It is like a character in a dream who believes itself to be real, separate from the dreamer. The doorway to freedom. Now, here is where our teaching takes a turn that may surprise you. Dying to self is not about self-denial or self-punishment. It is not about becoming weak or passive. It is not about eliminating desire or becoming emotionally numb. Dying to self is about awakening to what you really are. When you begin to see through the illusion of the separate self, you discover something remarkable. You are not merely a wave struggling in the ocean. You are the ocean expressing as a wave. You are not a separate fragment of consciousness trying to survive in the universe. You are the very consciousness in which the universe appears. This recognition changes everything. When the false self begins to dissolve, you find that you don't become nothing. You become everything. You don't lose power. You discover that real power has nothing to do with personal force. You don't become poor. You realize you have access to an infinite supply that was always present but hidden by your belief in limitation. The practical path. How does one die to self? Not through struggle. For struggle reinforces the very self we seek to transcend. Not through suppression, for what we resist persists. The death of self happens through understanding, through awareness, through the simple practice of noticing. Begin by observing your thoughts without identification. When fear arises, don't say, "I am afraid." Say instead, "There is fear appearing in consciousness." When desire arises, don't say, "I want this." Observe instead, "There is wanting happening." This subtle shift creates space between the true you pure awareness and the movements of the personal self. Practice what I call the pause of consciousness. In any moment of stress or struggle, stop, take a breath, ask yourself, what if I don't have to figure this out? What if there is an intelligence greater than my personal thinking that already knows the answer? Then wait in that space of not knowing, that sacred emptiness where divine intelligence can flow. Living by grace, as you begin to die to self, something miraculous happens. You discover grace. Grace is what flows when personal effort ceases. It is the invisible hand that guides you when you stop trying to control every outcome. It is the provision that appears when you stop believing that your security depends entirely on your own efforts. This doesn't mean you become lazy or passive. Rather, your action becomes inspired rather than driven. You move from a place of inner stillness rather than anxiety. You find that you can work without struggle, achieve without stress, give without depletion. The masters of the spiritual life have discovered this secret. The less I there is, the more life flows through you. When you get yourself out of the way, you become a clear channel for infinite intelligence, infinite love, infinite supply, the truth that sets you free. Why is this truth never told? Because our entire economic and social system depends on keeping you identified with the personal self. If you truly died to self, you would stop being manipulated by fear. You would stop buying things you don't need to fill an inner emptiness. You would stop accepting less than your divine inheritance because someone told you that you weren't enough. The ego, both personal and collective, fears this teaching more than any other. It knows that if you discover who you really are, its reign of tyranny ends. But here is the beautiful paradox. In dying to self, you don't lose anything real. You only lose your suffering, your limitation, your false sense of separation. What remains is your true self, eternal, unshakable, infinitely resourceful, permanently at peace. Your invitation. I invite you today to begin the practice of self-observation. Watch the movements of the personal self without judgment. Notice how it constantly seeks security, validation, and control. See how it creates suffering through its endless commentary and comparison. And in those moments of clear seeing, ask yourself, who is aware of this self? Who is watching these thoughts? That aware presence that you discover, that is what you really are. That awareness has never been born and can never die. It is not troubled by circumstances, not diminished by loss, not inflated by gain. As you rest more and more in this awareness, the personal self begins to lose its grip. Its death is not violent but gentle, like ice melting into water. And what emerges is freedom. Not freedom for the self, but freedom from the self. Contemplation today. You stand at a threshold. Behind you is a lifetime of identifying with a false self, of struggling and striving to make that self secure and significant. Before you is the pathless path of awakening, where you discover that you were never separate, never lacking, never in danger. The choice is always yours. You can continue to worship at the altar of the personal self, believing that your happiness depends on its success, or you can begin the beautiful process of dying to self and awakening to your true nature. This death is not an end, it is the beginning of real life. It is the doorway to peace that passes understanding, to love without opposite, to a joy that doesn't depend on circumstances. The truth is this: you have never been the small, separate self you think you are. You have always been the infinite awareness in which all life appears. The only question is, are you ready to stop believing the lie and awaken to the truth? The masters throughout the ages whisper the same message: die to self and live forever. Lose your life and find it. Surrender the false and inherit the real. This is the truth never told, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those with ears to hear and eyes to see. May you find the courage to die daily to the false self, that you might discover the immortal self that you have always been. In the stillness beyond thought, in the silence beyond words, truth reveals itself not as something to be grasped by the mind, but as the very ground of your being, the illusion of personal power. We have been conditioned from birth to believe in the supremacy of personal power. From our earliest days, we are taught that our success depends entirely upon our individual effort, our willpower, our determination to make things happen. This belief becomes so deeply embedded in our consciousness that we never question it. We assume that the more forcefully we assert ourselves, the more control we exert, the more we push and struggle, the greater our results will be. but observe what actually happens in your life. Notice how the things that flow most naturally, the solutions that appear most elegantly, the opportunities that serve you best, these rarely come through force. They arrive in moments of relaxation, in spaces of surrender, when you have temporarily ceased your frantic efforts to control outcomes. This is not coincidence. This is the universe showing you a fundamental truth. Personal power is an illusion that keeps you trapped in limitation. The ego self believes it is the author of your life, the source of your supply, the creator of your good. It takes credit for every success and trembles at every potential failure. But this self is merely a collection of thoughts, memories, and conditioned responses. It has no inherent power at all. It is like a puppet that has forgotten the puppeteer, believing its movements to be self-generated. When you begin to see through this illusion, something remarkable happens. You realize that the real power in your life has never been personal. The intelligence that beats your heart, that heals your wounds, that orchestrates the perfect timing of events. This is not your personal doing. There is a greater intelligence and infinite power that flows through you when you cease blocking it with the ego's demands and fears. The greatest discovery you can make is this: you don't need personal power because you have access to infinite power. Your only task is to stop obstructing it with the illusion of separation. Surrender as liberation. The word surrender frightens the ego self more than perhaps any other. In our competitive world, surrender suggests weakness, defeat, giving up. We are told never to surrender, to fight to the bitter end, to go down swinging. But this understanding of surrender comes from ignorance of what surrender truly means in the spiritual sense. True surrender is not defeat. It is the most intelligent action you can take. When you surrender, you are not giving up your power. You are acknowledging that your personal limited self never had the power you thought it did. You are releasing your grip on a rope that was never holding you up in the first place. Surrender means relaxing the fist of control and allowing life to flow through you, rather than trying to force life to bend to your will. Consider the analogy of swimming. A person who doesn't know how to swim will panic in deep water, thrashing and fighting, clears throat, using tremendous energy in a desperate attempt to stay afloat. This very struggle hastens their exhaustion and drowning. But the moment they surrender to the water, relaxing their body and trusting the natural buoyancy, they float effortlessly. The water that seemed like an enemy becomes a support. Life works exactly this way. When you stop fighting reality, when you cease demanding that circumstances be different than they are, when you release your attachment to specific outcomes, this is when you discover freedom. Surrender doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking action. Rather, your action becomes inspired instead of desperate, flowing instead of forced, effective instead of exhausting. The liberated life begins with surrender. You surrender the belief that you know how things should unfold. You surrender the assumption that your limited perspective sees the whole picture. You surrender the exhausting responsibility of trying to control everyone and everything. And in that surrender, you discover that you are held, guided, and provided for by an intelligence far superior to your calculating mind. This is not resignati. This is liberation. This is coming home to your true nature, the silent witness within you. Beneath the constant stream of thoughts, emotions, and sensations, there exists a silent witness, a pure awareness that observes all experience without being touched by it. This witness is who you truly are. Yet most people never discover it because they are completely identified with what is being witnessed, the thoughts, feelings, and experiences of the personal self. Right now, as you read these words, notice that there is awareness of the reading. Thoughts arise about what you're reading, agreement, disagreement, questions, memories, and there is awareness of those thoughts. Emotions may arise, interest, boredom, excitement, resistance, and there is awareness of those emotions. This awareness itself is perfectly still, perfectly present, untouched by the movements it observes. This is the silent witness, and it is your true self. The personal self is like weather constantly changing, sometimes stormy, sometimes calm, but never permanent. The Silent witness is like the sky, always present, always clear, always spacious enough to hold all weather without being disturbed by it. When you begin to identify with the witness rather than with what is being witnessed, everything changes. Problems don't disappear, but your relationship to them transforms completely. You realize that no circumstance can touch what you truly are. This discovery is not philosophical speculation. It is direct experience available to anyone willing to look in any moment of stress or confusion. You can pause and ask who is aware of this stress, who is observing this confusion. In that moment of inquiry, you step back from identification with the personal self and rest in the silent witness. From this position, clarity arises naturally. Solutions appear without force. You find yourself responding to I faith from wisdom rather than reacting from conditioning. The silent witness has access to infinite intelligence because it is not clouded by the ego's agenda, fears, and limitations. When you learn to live from this place of witnessing awareness, rather than from the chattering mind, you tap into a source of guidance that never fails. This is practical mysticism, not escaping from life, but discovering the dimension of yourself that was never trapped in the first place. Living by grace, not force. There are two ways to live, by force or by grace. Most of humanity knows only the way of force, striving, struggling, pushing, manipulating, controlling, exhausting oneself in the attempt to make life yield desired results. This is the way of the personal self, and it leads inevitably to burnout, frustration, and a deep sense that life is hard and you are alone in your struggle. Grace is the opposite of force. Grace is what flows naturally when you align yourself with the deeper current of life rather than swimming against it. Grace is the unexpected help that arrives, the perfect timing you didn't orchestrate, the solution that appears when you stop trying to figure everything out with your limited mind. Grace is what happens when you get out of your own way. But grace is not random or arbitrary. It operates according to a spiritual law as reliable as gravity. Grace flows in proportion to your surrender of personal sense. The more you release the belief that everything depends on your individual effort, the more you discover a power that works through you with far greater effectiveness than you could ever achieve alone. This doesn't mean you stop taking action. It means your action becomes inspired rather than desperate, flowing from inner guidance rather than from fear-based thinking. Living by grace requires a fundamental shift in consciousness. Instead of waking up each day with a mental list of everything you must make happen, you begin your day in stillness, acknowledging the presence of infinite intelligence that knows what you need before you ask. Instead of approaching challenges with tension and worry, you learn to pause and invite wisdom that surpasses your personal understanding. Instead of taking credit when things go well or blame when they don't, you recognize that there is only one power operating, and your role is simply to be transparent to it. The masters of spiritual life have discovered this secret. The less the personal self interferes, the more efficiently life unfolds. When you live by grace, you find yourself in the right place at the right time, meeting the right people, receiving the right ideas. Synchronicities multiply. Doors open that you didn't even know existed. This is not magic. It is the natural result of aligning with the intelligence that orchestrates the entire universe. The invisible supply. One of the greatest fears of the personal self is lack. The fear that there is not enough, that resources are limited, that if you don't grab and hoard, you will be left without. This fear drives so much of human behavior: competition, greed, anxiety about the future, reluctance to give or share. The personal self looks at bank accounts, job security, market conditions, and concludes that its survival depends entirely on visible material resources. But there exists an invisible supply that has nothing to do with material circumstances. This supply is infinite, inexhaustible, and constantly seeking expression through you. It is the source of every genuine idea, every creative solution, every act of love and generosity. It is what the mystics call divine abundance, and it has nothing to do with how much money is in your account or how favorable your circumstances appear to be. The invisible supply operates by entirely different principles than the material world. It doesn't decrease when you give. It actually increases. It doesn't depend on economic conditions or human manipulation. It flows most freely to those who have released their fearful grip on material security and learned to trust the infinite source of all supply. This is why some of the most generous, peaceful, and creative people often have very little material wealth, while others with vast resources live in constant anxiety and fear of loss. When the false self dies, when you cease identifying with the limited separate ego, you gain access to this invisible supply. You discover that you are never without resources because the source of all resources lives within your own consciousness. Ideas come when you need them. Opportunities appear at the right moment. Help arrives from unexpected quarters. This is not wishful thinking or positive affirmation. This is a spiritual law that can be proven in your own experience. The key to accessing invisible supply is releasing dependency on visible supply. This doesn't mean you ignore practical matters or become financially irresponsible. It means you stop believing that your security and well-being depend ultimately on material conditions. You begin to live from the awareness that consciousness is the source of all manifestation, and clears throat. As you are one with infinite consciousness, you can never truly lack anything essential to your unfoldment. Living from invisible supply brings a freedom that those identified with material security can never know. You find that you can give generously without fear of depletion. You can share your gifts freely without demanding specific returns. You can pursue your true calling without the paralyzing question, but how will I survive? The answer is always the same. The invisible supply that has sustained you thus far will continue to sustain you, and usually in ways far more elegant and abundant than your limited planning could have arranged. Conclusion. The invitation to awakening. My friends, we have journeyed together today through territory that most never dare to explore. We have looked directly at the uncomfortable truth that the self we think we are, this collection of thoughts, fears, ambitions, and defenses, is not our true identity at all. We have examined how this false self is the source of every limitation, every suffering, every sense of separation that haunts human existence. But more importantly, we have glimpsed the magnificent truth that lies beyond this illusion. That you are not a small separate wave struggling in an indifferent ocean, but the ocean itself expressing through this unique form. You are not a fragment of consciousness trying to survive in a vast universe, but the very consciousness in which the universe appears. This is not philosophy. This is not religious dogma. This is practical, demonstrable truth that can be verified in your own experience right now, in this very moment. The awareness that is reading these words that is present to all experience. That awareness is untouched by any problem, unlimited by any circumstance, undiminished by any loss. That awareness is what you are. The death of the false self is not something to fear. It is the most natural, the most inevitable, and the most liberating event that can occur in consciousness. Every moment of peace you have ever experienced has come when this false self temporarily relaxed its grip. Every moment of true joy, every experience of genuine love, every flash of creative insight, all of these have emerged from the space beyond personal self. What I am inviting you to is not a weekend project or a self-improvement program. I am inviting you to a complete revolution in consciousness, a fundamental shift in who you take yourself to be. This shift doesn't happen all at once for most people. It is a gradual awakening, a progressive dying to the old and being born into the new. But you can begin today. You can begin right now. In this very moment, you can stop identifying with the voice in your head that comments on everything, judges everything, resists everything. You can notice that there is awareness of that voice, and that awareness is your true nature. You can practice the pause of consciousness, that sacred moment of stopping before reacting, where infinite intelligence has the opportunity to flow through you. You can begin to live by grace rather than force, surrendering your agenda and allowing life to unfold through you rather than constantly trying to bend life to your will. You can begin to trust the invisible supply, releasing your fearful grip on material security and discovering that consciousness itself is the source of all good. This teaching is not for everyone. Many will hear these words and turn away, preferring the familiar suffering of the personal self to the unknown freedom of dying to self. The ego will always choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. But for those who are ready, for those who have reached the end of their rope with the old way of living, for those who sense that there must be something more, for you, this message is a lifeline. The truth is that you are already free. You have always been free. The bondage was only ever in belief, never in reality. The separate self that seems so solid, so real, so much in need of protection and promotion, it is nothing more than a phantom, a shadow, a dream character that you have mistaken for yourself. Waking up from this dream doesn't require years of effort or special techniques or guru initiation. It requires only this: a willingness to see what is actually true, a willingness to question your most fundamental assumptions about who you are, a willingness to let go of the known and rest in the unknown. As you go forward from this moment, I encourage you to be gentle with yourself. The dying to self is not accomplished through force or self-criticism. It happens through understanding, through awareness, through compassion for the struggles of the false self. Even as you see through its unreality, be patient with the process. Some days you will feel liberated and free. Other days the old patterns will reassert themselves with surprising strength. This is normal. This is part of the journey. Remember that you are not doing this alone. The very impulse to awaken, the very attraction you feel to this teaching, this is the infinite self calling itself home. The intelligence that beats your heart and guides the planets in their orbits is the same intelligence that is orchestrating your awakening. Trust it, surrender to it, let it live your life. In closing, I leave you with this contemplation. What would it be like to live without the burden of defending and maintaining a separate self? What would it be like to move through your day without the constant internal commentary and judgment? What would it be like to face challenges without fear, to give without expecting return, to love without condition, to act without attachment to outcome? This is not a fantasy. This is your birthright. This is what becomes possible when the false self dies and the true self is allowed to live through you. This is the freedom that passes all understanding, the peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, the joy that has no opposite. The door stands open. The invitation has been extended. The only question that remains is, will you walk through, die to self, and discover the deathless? Release the false and inherit the real. Let go of the dream and awaken to reality. This is the truth never told, and now you have heard it. What you do with it is between you and the infinite. May you have the courage to follow this truth wherever it leads, knowing that every step toward dying to self is a step toward the life you were always meant to live. In the silence beyond all words, in the stillness beyond all thought, in the awareness that has no beginning and no end, there you are, and there you have always been. Welcome home. Be still and know that I am God. Not the personal you, but the I that you truly are. Infinite, eternal,